Good evening, everyone. This is Luke Grand from Practical Farmers of Iowa. Welcome to the Practical Farmers of Iowa Farminar. Do I hear my echo? Tom, do you want to mute your mic for me? Yeah, I hear an echo. Okay, thanks, Tom.
Mute my
All
speakers or
right.
mute the mic?
Oh, your mic itself. If you go ahead and mute it, just hit that green button until it goes dark. Yep, on your microphone it should go dark. Okay, great. There you go. All right, folks, let's get started. Happy to have you here for another Farminar. Wanted to just switch our views. Encourage everybody to put in your email address in the chat box on the left side of your screen. We'll keep in touch with you and make sure we can get a feel for how we're doing on these Farminars, how we can improve them. We are in the midst of an interesting change in Iowa's land management. 42% of Iowa farmers say they will retire by 2014. The poll was taken in 2009, so next 5 years, that would be 2014. And that's a big deal. We care about that at Practical Farmers of Iowa, and we want to make sure beginning farmers are ready. We think we can help ensure their success through a bunch of different ways. And this is just one of the ways we try to do that with our online seminars. Really supportive of beginners, and we've done over 48 Farminars now over the last 3 years. And we're in the middle of our Winter Farminar series, with just a few more left coming up through March 13th. Please join us on Tuesday evenings next week, pricing poultry, and then determining whether your produce farm will flourish or wilt, looking at business planning, financial projections. Great opportunity there for folks of any type of enterprise to see what it looks like to throw together numbers for the first 3 or 5 years of your business. And then we'll end with long-term fertility management, adding livestock and longer crop rotations with another longtime PFI member, Ron Roseman. So another great few Farminars to finish up the year. Very grateful for the Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Program grant that's helping us able to pay our farmers for sharing their knowledge. We care a lot about planning and care a lot about diversity. Here's Tom Frantzen, our speaker tonight, right there on the left in the middle of the screen there, who's listening to another grazer beginning farmer from Northeast Iowa, talking about planning for the farm and diversity of management practices. So we really care about those topics, and we try to bring those to you as we've done over 48 Farminars now. The way we do these is we have a quick intro from all the speakers, myself included, and then we'll send it over first to the beginner, Wade Dooley, and then over to Tom. And they'll have a great discussion. And we want to involve you in the discussion, of course. Your questions are welcome in the chat box on the left side of your screen throughout the presentation. And we will conclude promptly at 8:30. So we're glad for you to join us here, and you are active participants in these Farminars, and we're glad to have your questions. We're an open, supportive, diverse organization. Practical Farmers of Iowa cares a lot about its members and helping each other, sharing their ideas, and hopefully helping everybody be better farmers and make better profit and be better to the environment all the time while enhancing their communities. It's a really great organization, and we really would be glad to have your membership. Practical Farmers of Iowa charges just $35 a year for an individual, $45 for the whole farm, with lots of great benefits to that membership. It's a real priceless opportunity to get connected with a bunch of great folks who want to share their ideas with you and learn from you as well. Join online today, practicalfarmers.org/join. We've got a lot of great opportunities for PFI farmers to learn this winter. We had some great opportunities at our annual conference the second week of January, where our folks can share person-to-person, face-to-face, and share their ideas. But we like to try to extend that sharing with our farmers from across the winter time through these Farminars and into our summer field days, which come up June through October. So look for 30 new field days coming from Practical Farmers of Iowa this summer, where you can learn from other beginning farmers and experienced farmers alike. Fresh ideas are always exciting to share. So let's begin with Wade Dooley sitting next to me here. And we'll pull up your slides, Wade, and get going. This is your second Farminar with us, isn't that right, Wade?
Yeah, that'd be about right.
Was it 2 years ago that we had another Farminar with you?
Yeah, I think it'd be about right. It was after season '09. Yep. So
Glad to have you back.
well, glad to be back. Hopefully, I can learn something. Hopefully other folks can learn too. All right, here we go. All right, figuring out technology here. Okay, well, I'm Wade. I'm the 6th generation on my family's farm, Glenwood Century Farm. I live in the house my great-great-great-grandfather built back in 1874, so my family's been on this ground for a very long time, and I intend to keep it that way. That's my home farm there. My dad and I farm about 1,200 acres between the two of us. I've got my own farm that I'm running, and then I also work with him on his. We run about 900 acres in a typical corn soybean system that you'll find anywhere in the state. My folks and I are in the process of transitioning the family farm from my parents to me. My dad's thinking about retiring sometime in the next 87 years, and I'm hoping to take over sometime in between there. We raise conventional row crops, half in corn and half in soybeans. We're not organic. We do Roundup Ready beans and some transgenic corn, although not as much of that as the seed salesman thinks we ought to. I'm not really sold on transgenics as necessary items all the time, especially when it costs 2 to 3 times as much as a conventional corn. But we do use it where we need to, and we use some chemicals to control things, although not as much, again, as the chemical dealer thinks we ought to. We try to fit each practice with each different farm. We farm a lot of variable soils and variable places, so. We usually make about 50 acres of hay. Our hay farm is a few miles away from the home place on hilly ground that's pretty good for alfalfa and not the best for corn or soybeans. It's got a lot of rocks in it and pretty heavy clay. This farm is in long-term rotation, corn, soybeans, and then alfalfa hay with an oat nurse crop to start it the first year. We mow the oats rather than combine them, though. We just make hay off them. We push the hay ground pretty hard. We cut about 5 years rather than the 3 that Iowa State always talks about. Alfalfa seed isn't cheap, and so we try to make the most of it as far as hay goes. The hay goes to our cow-calf operation. We generally sell about 3/4 of our calves as background feeders, so about 500-600 pounders. And then we feed the rest out, any that are off-sized or off-colored. It's amazing what the difference the hide color can make in the sale barn. But we've noticed that if we sort them off, then we can make just as much money if we feed them out as if we try to sell them. We grind all our own feed ration using our own corn. We've got a bale grinder that we use for grinding the hay and corn stalks together, stretch our hay farther in the wintertime, and also to give us a little bit better bedding. We run about 75 cow-calf pairs. We're down from 120 last year. We had a rented farm get sold, and a lot of that pasture just went under the plow. So since we lost some pasture, we had to cut back on our cow herd. I'm in the process of fencing the rest of our pastures off for rotational grazing, which is kind of a slow process given that I'm learning where the cows like to go and where they don't, and trying to control some of their traffic. I've also started raising some vegetable crops in order to diversify and spread my economic risk and some of my labor out. I've had some mixed results, but I haven't lost money yet, so I guess that's good. If I can't get bigger, I figure I better get better at using what I have available. The land in my area is awfully expensive to buy anymore. Right now, the going rate looks to be about $10,500 an acre. So I'm not buying any ground right now. And the rent isn't exactly a whole lot better, running anywhere between $200 and $400 an acre. Unless the big boys come in, then it's $400 to $500. So I go after the ground that nobody else wants. Most of what I farm is what I'd call marginal crop ground. Some of it's stuff that came out of CRP and should have gone right back in, but didn't. Either I'm farming river bottom that's flood prone, or heavily degraded side hills, or really small fields that are better suited to the 1950s sized equipment rather than the modern big toys. With a small land base that I've got, I need to get more profit out of every acre that I have, while also working to improve the poorer quality ground so it actually can produce more. The downside with doing that is a lot of the ground that I run is rented ground, so I have to be careful not to sink too much money or work into somebody else's ground, because if I lose the lease, all that effort got wasted. So I have to be careful. Everything has to balance, or something fails. And this is why I'm interested in adding another crop to my rotation on some of the ground I have, because it needs it. In the spirit of making the most of every acre, we've been using cover crops for quite a while to improve soil and to provide off-season forage for our cattle. This picture here is from 2 years ago. We flew on winter wheat into standing soybeans at leaf yellowing, and that's me picking beans a month later. It gave us a lot of pasture, which stretched our hay a long ways and let me run cattle on grass without damaging the pastures we had. Helped a lot with the soil structure. We didn't have mud. It was kind of nice to work with. We've done this, like I said, for the past couple of years, and we really like it. But we haven't tried using any of these cover crops that we've run for grain yet. We've done oats, rye, and winter wheat in the fall for cover crops, but we till them under every spring. I want to learn about adding a small grain crop as a cash crop rather than just a cover. After all, I know we can grow the plant. I just don't know if we can harvest and market the crop. And what works best as a cover crop may not necessarily work the best as a cash grain crop, so I kind of need to find that out as well. So there's my situation in a nutshell.
Well done. Okay. Cool. What a great introduction. Tom, do you want to respond to, how do you want to start? Do you want me just to go directly to your word slides? Tom, you can go ahead and turn on your mic now if you hear me here. You should be a green light on your. There you go.
Yeah, I've got a green light on the mic, and I went on the bar over here and I clicked so that it says unmute my microphone. You can't hear me now?
I hear you. Yep, I hear you. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, just I need to see what the slides are all on here, so just go through them real quick once. Okay, yeah, okay, that sounds fine. Yeah, just going through them real fast once, and then I'll back up. Yep, and right, that's probably a place to start. Okay, my wife and I own 300 acres of land in northern Chickasaw County. We rent 85 acres. Been farming since 1974. Transitioned to organic in 1995. A farm is a diversified farm. We have cattle and hogs. We have a Angus beef cow herd. We feed the calves out after they're weaned. We also have a brood sow herd, and then we finish the pigs out. Some of that farrowing is done on my son's farm. That's 3 miles north of where we live. We raise the traditional crops all organic, though. So we have corn and soybeans. We don't grow small grains individually, as it might historically have been, where we would grow, grow oats or barley or wheat. So we grow succotash. I should get into that in a little bit. But anyway, we grow small grains and then hand pasture. The motto of the farm is that diversity leads to stability, and that's been a very important principle that we followed for a very long time. We took a course in holistic management in the 1990s, in which we sat down and evaluated what we wanted out of life, determined our quality of life, and then learned how to test our actions so that they're compatible with our values. That's probably the most important things we did. After we took that course in holistic management, we knew that we wanted to, because chemical use was a violation of my quality of life, so we wanted to get away from the use of chemicals, and we wanted to have the farm more diversified. And so following Ron Roseman's advice, we wrote a 5-year business plan which integrated crop rotation in with our livestock. And that's the way the farm has functioned right up to this moment right now, is that we have a very definite set crop rotation. and then some of the crop is fed as far as the corn goes, and some of it is sold. The soybeans are all sold and into specialty markets, and then we buy protein back, but we feed up all the small grains, and we feed up almost all the hay and pasture. I'll go to the second slide now. Can you hear me, Luke? There we go. Okay, average farm income. Those are the last 5 years. I again emphasize that diversity leads to stability. So you take a look in there, the farm is just about a third of the basic enterprises where we feed cattle out, finish hogs, and grain. We sell a small amount of hay. Actually, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have any hay income at all. I've been a little cautious on buying any extra stock cows, so we tend to be running long on hay. That's why some of that gets sold. But that mix there has done well for us for a long-term period of time. I'll go to the next slide. I'll take you through our rotation right now. Okay, the first year is organic corn, and it almost always is following hay or pasture. We live in northern Chickasaw County in a typical, historically, a cold, wet country, although we're very intensely subsurface drained. And we're a long ways away from where Luke lives. I think there's quite a difference in our climates. But we manure the land before it is spring plowed, and I try to manure it on the same day we do the plowing, so I probably haul manure in the morning and plow in the afternoons. That work needs to be done 2 to 3 weeks prior to planting so that that manure and the turn downside has time to degrade so that the nutrients available for the following crop. Plant corn about mid-May at about that 32,000 population. We rotary hoe once, sometimes twice. Cultivation is almost always twice, with flame weeding very oftenly used. Oddly enough, we pick almost all our corn on the ear and store all our corn on the ear. That we've done that way for a very long time, and we have reasons now that we're really glad that we maintained that, because there are some alternatives we're going to do on our farm because of the way that we produce dry corn crops. Go to the next slide then. Okay, after a year of organic corn, we go to soybeans. Tillage depends upon the presence of perennial weeds. I think we have about the same weed pressures we had when I was born in 1952. It's mostly quackgrass and Canada thistle, but giant rag might be the exception to it, and giant rag is going to be part of our discussion tonight because that changed how we're handling our small grains. So the tillage I use following corn really depends upon conditions out in the field. In an ideal world, I'd like to ridge plant the soybeans on the ridges after the cultivation from corn. I tend to have such good crackgrass, I usually can't make that work. So typically we're planting soybeans with a special planter that's 24-inch rows, 7-row. It's a planter that we built out of modified our own planter. Then we have a rotary hoe and a front mount cultivator with a cutaway disc to get in and cultivate really close when the beans are small. We use a tine weeder. We actually have a rear mounted cultivator that we use with the front mount cultivator at the same tractor at the same time. That's helped out with weed control, although weed control soybeans is typically the most challenging place we have control weeds. Go to the next slide. Okay, the small grains, I've probably almost always raised small grains, and my dad certainly did all the years he ever farmed. It was oats exclusively, because we we're so far north that winter wheat doesn't work, and spring wheat is questionable because of the disease pressures from northeast Iowa, and there's long-term history on that. So I grew oats exclusively, and some years cash marketed oats, a lot of years fed oats. But I went away from oats about the year of 2000, 2001, and then for several years grew strictly spring planted barley. And I loved barley to start with, and then after a while I figured barley's got a love-hate relationship, because I saw enough barley failures and low-yielding barley that I found barley to be pretty frustrating. So after several years of growing barley and no oats at all, then I started to grow succotash, a blend of wheat, oats, and barley, all planted at the same time in the spring. Those varieties, I'm buying that succotash seed, so that mixture is determined by the Albert Lee Seed House. My experience with succotash has been real good, and I'm not marketing this. So if it is windrowed and combined, then we use it for either cattle or hog feed. But what we've done in the last 2 years is that we grow about 60 acres of small grains a year out of 385 acres of tillable ground. And so every year we'll take a look at what the small grain crop looks like by late June, early July, and we'll go out there and we'll windrow all the areas of the field where we got giant ragweed pressure, or I would say other weed pressure, but typically it's giant rag is what we're after, because we don't want that rag to go to seed. We'll windrow that and have a guy come in with a chopper, and we'll chop it and put it in a bag. And we have been bagging now. We bagged last year, and we bagged the year before that, and then feeding that silage to our weaned calves, and been very, very happy with that. And definitely intend on continue to doing that, because we're adding value to something that doesn't have a heck of a lot of value to it to start with. Go to the next slide. Okay, then after the year of small grains, then we have 1 to 2 years of hand pasture. When we plant the small grains, we're planting a mixture of alfalfa, red clover, timothy, orchard grass, and brome grass. Again, in my book, diversity leads to stability. Some years the best pasture I got isn't even listed on there. It's quack grass, and quack is pretty terrific, but quack does not like dry weather. It sure didn't like last year. But we hay the first year almost exclusively. Pasturing is common after the first year into the second year. Haying is almost made totally in large square bales stored in hoop shed, and it's used for winter feed for our stock cows and our weaned calves. That's the basic part of the operation. I'm not sure, Luke, if I have any more slides beyond it. We were concerned about internet service, being able to get a lot more pictures of our farm sent down, so we didn't get a lot of other ones sent to us. But your questions really are the most important thing. I certainly was impressed. Listen to Wade. You've got a great attitude, and but you're certainly facing some of the most amazing problems, you know, that we could ever have imagined. So, but we're a long ways away geographically apart. It doesn't sound like a lot, but northern Chickasaw County is not similar to central Iowa or southern Iowa by any means, and because our climate and soil types are different. But that's the basic background of the farm. And you know, like I think that the general discussion and questions are the most important part of the presentation. So, okay, what do you want? Do I shut my microphone off now?
No, let's try to keep it. Maybe see if it works if we both keep them on.
Okay, we'll try to keep it on then.
So why don't we pop it on and off?
So I'll shut it off now.
Yeah, because his mic's picking up our. Yeah, we'll just go hit it on and off based on when we're talking and when you're talking. So we'll start on this end.
You run it like a CB radio. All right, so Tom, how do you establish your small grains with your alfalfa? Are you broadcasting? Are you getting a drill that's modified, or how are you doing that?
Okay, the question is, how do we establish the forage seeds or the small grains? No, we have a grain drill, and I try to get the ground worked down as flat as possible. There are times we're growing small grains after corn. I don't like that. I'd rather grow small grains after soybeans, but the ground certainly is worked as level as possible, drilled in. I don't like March as far north as we are. I like very early April, and I certainly want the best conditions possible. So the oats is drilled in, the small grains are drilled in a couple inches deep. There's a packer behind those wheels, and then behind that is the forage seeds are scattered on top of the ground, and then they're rolled in with a cultipacker.
All right. What have you run into any fertility issues? Like if you're following corn or if you're following soybeans, has there been anything that you had to watch out for? Down here, we run into either areas that had a little too much nitrogen and have the small grains go down. Most of my neighbors have quit growing oats now because they'd fertilize them for grain, and then right about the time came to harvest, we'd get a wind or a storm and everything would go down because they had nitrogen on, and it really got them leggy.
I've seen it both ways. It certainly is more difficult to grow any small grains after corn. In the country I come from, and these are kind of some really dirty words to use, but if I'm going to grow small grains after corn, I want clean, moldboard plowed in the fall. And I get those sins out in the open so everybody knows that I'm not trying to be pious about this thing, because nobody's proud about clean fall plowing. However, if you bury the trash in the fall and you got clean black soil, you get it planted earlier in the spring, and the crop is not competing with the microbes when they degrade the corn stalks. So that has been something I basically have had to do. If I want to have a small grain crop failure, I think I know the recipe. I'll just minimum till, disc till corn stalks in the spring and drill the small grains into that corn stalk residue, and I can just about plan on a poor crop. I don't think I've ever seen an exception. And it seems to be that the fall tillage and fall really heavy-duty tillage does seem to make a difference. But I want to emphasize that's where I come from in northern Chickasaw County. But I don't have those problems if it falls soybeans. Then I will work that ground typically twice. As far as the crops lodging, it's certainly more likely to have oats lodging than it is barley. Barley's pretty terrific. I've seen barley go down. I've actually seen barley down once pretty extensively, but in general, barley tends to stand much better than oats does. But that's pretty much been just my experience on that fertility-wise goes.
All right. I've seen barley growing in other parts of the world, but I've never seen it growing in Iowa. The varieties that you can get around here, are they very tall, or are they more of a like a knee-high crop, or what's it look like around?
There are a lot of different kinds of barleys because there are malting barleys, there are feed barleys. The ones I have grown in the past come from the Albert Lee Seed House, and I think I was picking the barleys up they recommended for grain production. Barley's an interesting crop. There's some things it really hates. It gives you zero tolerance on soil conditions when you plant. It has got to be absolutely good, and if there's anything less than absolutely good, then it is going to tell you don't like that, and it really will. Oats is much more tolerant to the planting condition. I'm not talking about mudding something in, but I mean if conditions are just a little less than marginal, you might not notice difference in oats. Barley, that's just day and night difference. It hates that. Barley's also has some disease pressures that I think are unique. It can get an ergot, which can make livestock sick. And barley can get mold contaminations. If it's used for livestock feed, like wheat, and oats all have to be checked out for molds and toxins because all small grains like to carry toxins. But back to, in general, barley's shorter than oats, yields less straw than oats, yields less grain than oats, at about 85% of the feed value of corn. That's the good side. The negative side is that barley has a unique characteristic in the seed in that it breaks up very hard when you process it. Barley is right at, as I'm told this from the equipment manufacturers, the most difficult grain there is to grind and to produce into a livestock ration. It almost defies proper grinding. The same process that'll take corn down to 700 microns, the exact same equipment, run the exact same way, and that 700 microns is pretty good for poultry and pork diets. That same process would be lucky if it got barley down to 900 microns, and it might be at 1,000 microns, which is so coarse that your feed conversion is going to be poor. Actually, if you want to get barley correctly ground for livestock ration, it almost needs to be ground twice. You can imagine the joy of this. So it is as unique characteristic. But I don't have that problem when I chop it at 70% moisture and stuff it in a bag. Then we let the moisture dissolve the kernels, and the feed conversion seems to be real good. So it sounds like I'm terrible negative on barley. It's a good feed source. It can be a good crop, but it likes fertility. But it can have things go wrong with it. And almost none of these are true with oats. Oats is fairly easy process. Oats is, I'd say, easier to grow. Oats will certainly yield more. Both oats and straw yield is going to be higher. A lot of people think an oat straw is a much nicer straw, and it probably is.
All right. I see we got some questions on the left here. Kathy Barkalow is asking if we have mold problems storing hay under cover. We don't store our hay under cover because I don't have a single building that's got the capacity for the hay that we've got. In fact, I've got machinery sitting outside because I don't have enough capacity for the machinery I've got. What about what have you seen, Tom? Have you been you've stored hay inside? Have you seen too much mold?
Yeah, we store hay in a hoop building, and I had a fire 2 years ago. And prior to that, I was pretty confident. But we have a 40 by 80 hoop building that stores the big square bales in, and it does a good job of curing. The mold problem that I know of in the country I come from tends to be from those covers that are right down tight on top of the bales, and moisture will get in between the bale and the tarp and cause spoilage right there, and that can be substantial. The advantage of a hoop building is that you never get the hay tight against the tarp, so you've got some air on the top, and the wind will blow through that shed, and it does a nice job of curing it. I'd have to add that my fire was caused from something that old farmers warned me about, and I never had the experience, but I baled, and I baled once in the month of May in what we thought was in great conditions, immature red clover. Once. It will never happen twice, because you can think that stuff is nice and dry, beautiful shape, ready to go on the bale, and the moisture in the stems will get that bale to heat, and immature red clover has, the old timers say, would burn more barns to the ground than anything they ever heard of. But mold-wise, with covers, I think it depends upon the type of cover.
All right, let's see. I see Jeff Klinge's asking what date ragweed becomes viable. I'd say whenever it warms up. I don't know.
I think his question is about when you would chop the giant rag off so there wouldn't be weed seeds in it. I think the giant ragweed seeds become viable in mid to late July. When we're taking the silage off, it's earlier than that. And I want to add that the first year we bagged this silage, we let the grain get too mature. Everything was too mature, and it got too dry, and we had a lot of problems in the bags because of that, both because of rodents. Last year, we went at it earlier and higher moisture, and it turned out beautiful. But when I looked at giant rag over, there's no seeds formed in where I live in late June and early July. But I think by the 1st of August, that would be a different story.
All right, so now all you're doing now basically is chopping silage. You're not trying to harvest any grain. When you did harvest grain, were you windrowing that too? I forgot.
No, we out of the 60 acres, we probably chopped 25 acres and probably grain harvest 35 acres. What we're trying to do is we're trying to improve weed control and improve the use of a crop grown on our farm through silage, where otherwise the weed pressure would reduce yields. So it really is mixed, but we windrow everything. Our country, again, is not very good for standing harvesting of small grains. Historically, windrowers have been the predominant way that small grains is harvested to get the grain to correct moisture, to reduce any spoilage and moisture problems at harvest time, and also to make harvest combining going a lot better because the material is dry when it goes through the machine. But I know a lot of places in the country that they direct combine. It's just
Okay. Let's see. What were some of my other questions? What have you figured what your seed costs and harvest costs are compared to just going with it as a nurse crop and baling it all rather than running silage, just baling it for hay? Because we've been doing oats as a nurse crop my entire life, but we've always baled it for hay. The last time my dad said he combined oats was probably back in the early 80s, and he said ever since then it's usually been too wet. We don't have a windrower without crimping rolls. Our mower is a mower conditioner, and I don't think that'd work. I'd have to go get a windrower. What do you think?
I think the windrower is important. See, this goes back to the farm mix. We need straw because we have hoop buildings. We finish hogs out. So straw to us is really important. We got to have some straw. We also need straw for bedding for our calves that are fed and housed over the winter time. So we've got to have some straw every year. And because the fact we cultivate our corn stalks, our corn ground twice, we tend to get enough ridges that we haven't found a decent way to make corn stalk bedding yet. Wouldn't mind doing it. So we really do need to do some small grain harvest every year just to get the small grains. There are windrowers for sale. I bought a great windrower 2 years ago for $700. Great shape, hydrostatic drive. You couldn't get over it. 12-footer, a really nice one. So that stuff is around, but I'm pretty partial to the windrowing part of it.
Okay, let's see. We've got some more questions on the left. We've got what weeds in the small grains that you windrow and any palatable issues.
No, I've had a beef cow herd since about '95, and when those cows get near Grover someplace, the first thing they go after is a giant rag, and they eat that right down to the ground. And I think if I've seen some figures on it, actually it's a pretty good nutrition, about like quackgrass. I think those are terrible weeds out there. It just depends on what the harvesting combine looks like. No, there's been no palatability issues as long as we didn't have any damage to the bag, really of any kind whatsoever with that. So that's worked out real well. I want to ask one question here. We deal with one question at a time with this, but we don't want to deal with 2 questions at a time?
We can, yeah. I've just been doing it that way. Doesn't matter. All right, let's see. We'll go some more questions on the side here. A known market for the grains, Quaker oats and Cedar Rapids taking oats. I've heard stories of the guys in my area trying to sell oats to Quaker, and a lot of times they get rejected because Quaker oats, a lot of those oats going in there, the word is most of them are coming out of Canada now because the quality control is a lot better than what we can do in Iowa. There's certain standards for feed quality, or for food quality, and that'd be food grade oats, and I think they've got pretty high standards for those because they all have to blend in with whatever else they have. Do you know anything about that, Tom?
Yeah, we're close to St. Ansgar, and Grain Millers is a major buyer of small grains, both oats, wheat, and barley, and processor. I think they might even do more than Quaker does in Cedar Rapids, but I know that almost all the Grain Millers, small grains, come out of Canada. If I understand the physiology of the plant right, what goes on is when small grains flower, the conditions out there, the atmosphere or the moisture and the humidity, it really needs to be correct. And if you get real humid conditions or a real wet spell at the wrong time, that's where we tend to get the diseases and the mold problems that are so serious. And they really are bad. There are toxins in small grains that will cause abortions in livestock. There are toxins in barleys that are unique. but they don't tend to get it in the major grain producing areas of small grains in Canada and North and South Dakota. And that's why those areas have always got that history of producing such, they're the historically that strong. It'd be great to tell you that you could rely upon Iowa markets for the small grains, but man, it's a crapshoot. You can have years of do well, but I haven't seen or heard from people in the last 5 years I can remember that have had real good test weight on oats in Iowa. Even in good years, it seems like the test weight on the oats is in the low 30s, and you've got to be in the high 30s, close to 40, in order for anybody to want it. I appreciate what Wade's saying in trying to add the diversification of a small grain crop in Iowa. But in my own experiences, I've sold oats and I've sold barley to grain millers in St. Ansgar. But I found the best market is through feeding it up on the farm and not have to get into all of the problems with having that stuff processed for them, the variety's right, and then you get there and then they're saying, well, your toxin level's too high or your test weight's a point too low. And that has been an ongoing problem that I'm afraid goes with our territory we live in. Wish I could tell you better news.
Sorry to ask a question, Tom, but there's, maybe this is a stupid question, but how does it pay to spend all that fuel to put up silage and spend all the fuel windrowing it and picking it up? And I mean, couldn't you just feed a different lower cost feed?
Our farm, I thought earlier about this earlier this winter. If you took the machinery and the fossil fuel out of our farm, I could make it work. I'm no horse farmer. I don't know anything about horses. But there would be a way of making our farm like it is work without any machinery and without any fuels. But if you took the small grains out of our farm, I would know how to make it work. We are extraordinarily dependent upon that. And so we rotate and seed down every year because the overall package has been profitable. It's one of the reasons the farm went organic is that because we're on 385 acres, we need to add value to things. And so, and you can laugh and say, well, the truth today is that if I took my 2011 calf crop and sold them for, as I hear, $2 a pound right now, I'd make more money than I ever will feeding those cattle out. And that's true. But I'm going to make money feeding those cattle out anyway. It's just part of the overall package of the farm. And you see the market that we're into, those markets are not big, and there aren't any huge number of players. In fact, the number of players are very small. And so those markets are very dependent upon the few of us that are raising that type of cattle. And if we would abandon them, they might not be there a few years from now. So we maintain the crop rotation we have, we maintain the diversity we have, and we enjoy the economic stability we have because it kind of comes as a package. And we don't try to pick the package apart. I can tell you that last year we had the greatest returns per acre I've ever seen in corn, period. And that corn just got shipped last week. But I'm not going to plant the whole farm to corn. We don't have to go that route. We'll plant so much small grains, we'll plant so much hay, I feed so much corn, I'm going to sell so much corn. And the overall package gives us the stability. To focus on individual profitability can be done. We've done some work at it. But I have to get my biases out. We do not use opportunity cost. I think that is a false way to evaluate farm profitability because we have to go back to what the overall goal is. And if we want a profitable, diversified farm, then we try to operate for a profitable, diversified farm. But we would never consider reducing our diversity in order to maximize short-term profitability. I'm not telling other people what to do, but I'm telling you that's the driving force to our management.
Thanks, Tom. That right there is something I've heard a lot of times from people that have done holistic management courses or that are very focused on the system as a whole. It's not something I've heard very often from the guys that we call the 4x4s. The corn, soybean only farmers that farm 4 weeks in the spring, 4 weeks in the fall, and the rest of the time they sit in the coffee shop. So hearing you say that you're farming as a system, everything works together, that fits more with my mindset. Fits a lot better than the guys that say, why would you ever do something other than corn? But my problem is trying to get everything to work together on rented ground and be able to convince the banker that what I'm going to do is actually going to pay bills. Feeding cattle works as long as you're not sticking your neck out too far, but sometimes it gets kind of iffy.
The challenge with the rented land is really a severe challenge. It's just like the challenge with land ownership that we face. I hate even use the word challenge. You have to be brave to think of what in the world the future is going to hold, because actually what we're fighting for here in my book is a far bigger picture than a lot of us think. What we're fighting for is economic democracy. And if we concentrate all this land in the hands of a couple of individuals, we are going to have horrible society, horrible communities, horrible everything I can think of. And it's not a future that I think we can just let slide into place because it's the way things are going to turn out. I think we have to try to do everything possible to keep entrepreneurs and wealth generation in the hands of young people. An old farmer who's passed away in the neighborhood now told me something one day. He said that every calf that's born, every litter of pigs that's farrowed, and every acre of crops that are grown are the new wealth for the community. And that wealth is for the community. And if that wealth is concentrated to the hands of a couple of individuals, then the community is going to wither and die. And so this sounds like a lecture, but it's where we're coming from. We have to find ways to go through this because the alternative is unacceptable.
Well said. I heard once an old farmer said it in my area. He said, I don't want to farm my neighbor's ground. I want them to farm it. I want to farm as neighbors and not as competitors. It's kind of interesting that some of the guys in my area, and they're still considered kids, and they're about 56 years old, but they're trying to grab as much ground as they can and compete with the boys from Minnesota and the boys from Missouri that are coming up that are farming 15,000 acres and more. And, you know, I'm almost wanting them to fight each other out, because if the ground ever turns around, if the profits start dropping in corn and soybeans, those boys are sunk. But at the same token, if those boys are sunk, what's left of the community? So the macro vision is not real good. I don't like the long range outlook on the system that's developing right now. I like being diversified. I like raising a lot of different stuff. It's a lot of work, but I'm curious what I can do with adding something in. I'd love to be able to have a harvestable crop as far as a grain goes, and be able to use that grain either as a sales item or as a seed item, which honestly, after trying to go all over the place to find cheap or inexpensive cover crop seed, I'm almost tempted to start just raising my own for that. What do you raise your own seed then, or do you buy your seed every year?
Okay, I'm buying all my grass seeds, forage, the legumes and the grasses as well. I save back sometimes some succotash seed, It just depends upon how the year previous was. So there are times when we save seed. There certainly are good times to grow your own seed, especially in soybeans. That certainly can be done. But because those are pretty substantial expenses. But the thing that livestock can do is it can help a farm weather conditions and weather financial conditions better. You know, I hear people talking about their horrible expenses for planting the 2012 crops. Well, our seed cost went up. Fuel costs are up a little bit, but I don't have a fertilizer bill. I haven't bought any fertilizer since 1993. On ground that's been organic since 95, last year we, honest to God, got 175 bushel corn. So I certainly have not ruined my soil fertility. We don't have a herbicide or insecticide bill. So those are monies that we don't have to raise because we aren't going to expend them. We don't have to borrow for that or plan on that. So we don't have to gross as much money because our net is better because the farm is generating more. But we have to recycle our nutrients. That is extremely important. If you want to get me into a real battle mentality, and I fight this fairly often, is well-intended people that are trying to tell us that our livestock has got to be outdoors all the time, and we feed out cattle and hogs at home, and those cattle and hogs, they need to be in places where we get all the dung and urine captured and get out to the field so we get crop nutrient cycling. That, in my opinion, is where the best long-term money is. I'll throw a little something out. We have found now that there's about a ton of corn cobs in an acre of corn, roughly a ton. And those dry corn cobs, because we pick corn in the ear, comes out of those cribs perfectly dry. Those dry corn cobs have about an 8,000 BTU per pound heat value. If you do the numbers on it, it's equivalent to about 75 gallons of gasoline energy value per acre of corn. It's a numbing amount of energy out there in corn cobs if they're dry. And so I spent $5,000 last year on storage for dry cobs, and now I have two engineers engaged in a discussion of how we can turn it into electricity, because we can add value to something that we just use it for bedding and take back out in the field, and I don't think it'll influence the ecology of our ground at all, and our farm wouldn't have to get very big and generate more profitability. So one of the difficulties, I'll go a little bit of thin ice here, Wade, is that you probably have a viability size of your farm, but sometimes the size of your farm can make it difficult to implement alternative practices that you might need to experiment with. If I'd encourage you to do anything, and you're probably already doing this, it's something that Zimmer from Wisconsin said, Gary Zimmer said, that you should be taking a small piece of ground every year and doing something different on it to learn something. And that could be on profitability, it could be on improving the soil. But you need some flexibility on a small matter. It would be great in your situation if you could find a way to take a tract of ground and put a system together with crop rotation and see if you can't use livestock to make the overall package more profitable in the rest of the ground you farm. But I know with a farmer with a father and you may have all be on the same thinking level, those are difficult things to do. My father's passed away a long time ago, and he was supportive of the different things we did very well, but not everybody's in that situation.
Well, Tom, you're right. I've actually got a couple tracts that I have been experimenting on, and the one good thing about being a beginning farmer that is willing to take those small farms and take them on, I've got 4 farms. Each of them has less than 10-acre fields, which in our area is fairly small. I've got one farm that's actually only got 5 acres that's tillable, and it was in grass hay for 12 years, and I put on soybeans last year, which was a bad idea because I didn't inoculate them. I didn't even think about it, and I should have, because since that ground hadn't had soybeans on it for so long, the native rhizobia weren't really there. My beans were like 30 bushel beans, and that variety across the road went 50 bushels. So that was a mistake on my part, but I've been putting manure down on it because we have cattle. It helps a lot. Having a smaller cow herd than we used to means we have less manure to play with. But I'm like you. I don't think of manure as a real issue that has to be gotten rid of. It's a nutrient source, although it also can be a real great source of new weed seeds if you're not really careful with it in composting, which I discovered in my vegetable field. So I have learned I am not going to use the compost that I have on my vegetable fields, at least not right away, because that was a bad experience. But again, it was small scale, and so it didn't hurt me bad, but it certainly was an education.
I have never had an incident where we could see a flush of weeds because of hauling manure off of our piles. We just static compost. But that might be the fact that a lot of the manure comes through the hoop buildings, and we don't grow any vegetable crops. And we do spring moldboard plow all the manure down. But I suppose it could happen, but I had never seen that.
Yeah, I made the mistake of pulling from an old compost heap that had a lot of weeds growing on it the previous year. I didn't even think about it. So it's one of those things where, in hindsight, I was an idiot. But that happens. Learning experiences. Let's see, we got some questions on the side. Thoughts on future contracts for corn and beans? I was once told you'll never go broke making a profit. And that's about as good advice I can say for future contracts on corn and beans. Right now, every market I've seen is above the break-even for cost of production, whether you're organic or conventional. So outside of that, I don't know. Is it going to go up or down? Yeah. What do you think, Tom?
It's just a very good time in a lot of senses. Organic corn is $12 or better. Beans are about 21. And I do sometimes we contract, forward contract on either one of them. It's just a strange time. But if you can make money and keep yourself in a good financial situation, yeah, by all means. But the risk involved in planting crops is worse than it's ever been. I've never imagined people were telling me what they're spending per acre to put a crop in that ground. But also, I kind of wonder if you look at the stock cow herd, if a guys can't start out and start their own stock cow herd and make money on that because it looks like that future is there just is not going to be a lot of cattle around. The cattle are around, probably real good money. Just strange.
Yeah, it hurt us pretty bad when we lost that pasture and had to sell part of the herd off, because we were hoping to be able to start expanding our numbers, because definitely the cattle markets are fantastic. I think whether you're conventional or organic or grass-fed or what have you, it's there's a lot of potential in the market right now. I wish I had a lot more cattle on hand than I do. Although at the same token, I wish I had a lot more pasture for all those cows too. So I guess one of those, if I can get the one, maybe I can grow the other. Luke was sitting here asking me what some of my barriers to raising a small grain is in my area. The biggest barrier is knowledge. I don't know enough. I don't know what I don't know, as I was once told. I don't know what I can grow in my area. Like like Tom said, up in Chickasaw County, it's not the same as it is in northern Marshall County, which is not the same as it is in southern Appanoose County. What grows well in one place may not grow worth a darn in the other. What grows well in 1 year may not grow well in the next year. I've seen in our territory one farm that grew winter wheat, and he's grown it probably 3 years in a row, and I have yet to see any of the fields that he tried it in look good. They all looked pretty bad. They had good establishment, and then the giant ragweed came in, and he made sort of hay. He mowed it when the wheat was already mostly mature, and then he baled it, and it just looked like lousy hay. I've had neighbors that grew oats for a lot of years. A lot of them have quit because we've had so many wet springs. You get a good rain in June and then a lot of rain in July, and it makes it almost impossible if you don't have it windrowed to get those oats up off the ground. We went and actually made hay for one of my neighbors, which again made really lousy hay because the oats were over mature for haying. But we got them off the ground anyway.
We've had to, in the past years, and I think it's part of climate change, we just get worse weather. We've had it twice in the last 5 years, tip windrowed oats over to try to get it to dry out. I bought a rotary rake, a brand new, a couple years ago, which I absolutely love, and that rotary rake will, and invert a swat, do a pretty darn decent job. But one of our true difficulties is our changing climate, and it's not very forgiving. And we either are too dry or too wet. But that windrowed, that's one of the reasons I bought I shouldn't say fairly nice, but I do really have a kind of a nice windrower. And our oats is custom combined by a guy right down the road that just does our small grains for us. And so I don't windrow anymore, and I think we're going to get combined before we get any wet weather on it. That risk there is pretty substantial, because it seems like it's going to rain. It rains on something like 3 weeks at a time.
Yeah, no kidding about that. I remember making hay the last 3 years. I managed to time it halfway decent for most of our hay getting off the ground, but the neighbors that borrowed our mower, they didn't get it timed so well. About every time I got bales off the ground, they were mowing hay, and it rained then for about 2-3 weeks, every single cutting. It was a bad deal. But let's see, does anybody else have some more questions we can answer off the side on the chat box? Otherwise, let's see, what are some more things I wanted to know about? The windrowers, I did start looking a little bit for windrowers, and looks like the closest ones for me to go buy are in Nebraska, which are a bit of a haul for a machine that may cost me $1,000. It's kind of a long ways to go. But do you know of any places that are closer by that still would have windrowers around? Central Iowa is kind of a dead zone as far as any kind of small grain production or even livestock production on the acreage scale is concerned. There's not too many guys out there anymore that are raising cattle.
Yeah, I just got lucky on this one. There was one right in the neighborhood. I think the guy wanted to get rid of it because other people are always asking to windrow. And he said, if I sell you my windrower, he says, my neighbors will quit pestering me. So I was kind of surprised because it was a nice one. But if you find something nice, I think the Internet's about the best thing in the world on that machinery looking for things, because there certainly are windrowers around, and I don't think any of them are real expensive. I think a couple $1,000 buys a heck of a nice piece of machinery. And I'm not proud of owning that machinery, but I think it is kind of a necessity. Otherwise, I really don't know how else to do it. But questions-wise, we've got a cultipacker, and I think cultipacking the small grains in the ground improves conditions. You'd never want a cultipack if the soil was anything other than perfectly dry. We certainly want to get our ground as flat as possible. We bought a disc bine a couple years ago, a fairly new one, and once you went to the disc bines, Chickasaw County is famous for rock. We spent a lot of effort getting all the rock off the field after those small grains are planted. And I hate to use the word all, but those disc bines throw rock out like they come out of there like they're bullets. So there's no joke. but also makes cutting hay. The rotary rake, both those are expensive purchases, but the rotary rake has made hay in here absolutely better. It's just a really good piece of equipment as compared to basket rakes we used before. I'm trying to think what else to say about it. One advantage of taking it, but again, if you're taking a hay crop off, you're getting, cutting off as a hay, you're getting your new seed established better. But when you combine the small grains, you set that hay crop back, and that's pretty substantial. So that is kind of the concepts or difficulties of windrowing and combining the dry grain, is that your hay crop is not going to do as well.
Yeah, that's one of the concerns I had. The other thought I thought was thinking about doing is when I harvested the grain, rather than putting a hay crop with it, going in and putting a cover crop down or some sort of catch crop, like you put a clover or something in late. But because usually to harvest grain, you want a pretty thick seeding of your grain crop. At least that's what we always figured with oats. We ran a bushel and a half of oats for a nurse crop, but when Dad used to go and do oats for grain, he'd usually do 2 to 3 bushels. But he said if you do that, then you don't get much for hay underneath, so he didn't even bother with hay. He'd usually go in and seed something else.
That's a fascinating comment, because there's a large geographic difference. The guy right down the road who ran 85 acres from, he used to grow raised seed oats all the time, and he really was kind of a small grain specialist. So I've been around this discussion for a long time. We would consider planting oats alone, never planting less than 3 1/3 bushels per acre. 100 pounds per acre, pretty much standard procedure, and maybe 120. 2 bushels per acre would be such a thin stand that that wouldn't even been considered. So it's really an interesting difference geographically speaking, but that is that's just standard procedure from Northeast Iowa, that we would be planting our small grains much thicker than that.
So with that thick of a seeding, how good is your alfalfa crop underneath then? Or are you not seeding it that thick when you're taking it off as silage and succotash?
No, that's the standard. I plant of that succotash mix. I'm planting 100 to 115 pounds of seed per acre, and we get good survivability of our hay crop. We always have. As long as we don't get those windrows laid down on the ground, and those windrows laid down for 3 weeks, that is really hard on things. So that's been a difficulty. But no, but also I'm pretty skeptical of taking hay crop off in that seeding year, northern Chickasaw County. Again, we're far enough north. It wasn't very many years ago where anything we did in the fall wrecked the hay crop for the following year, even if it was grazed. I forget what fall. It might have been the fall of 2008, because our winters are pretty severe, and they're different than your winters are. So we have to be careful how that seeding stand goes into the fall. Making hay, my uncle used to say, you're not supposed to make hay in a month that ends with an R. That was his old rule. So if you take the month ending with an R out, I guess you can hay in August, and then you can hay in January.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit different. All right. Now, one of my other concerns with doing small grains is the areas that I really want to try small grains isn't anywhere near I can run cattle on. It also happens to be really hilly ground. We're talking mostly C and D slopes. This is rented ground, degraded hillsides, not much rock, thank goodness, but it's a lot of clay. And since it is rented ground, it's cash rented ground, they seem to think I need to be paying the cash crop rent rate rather than if I wanted to put it to hay or something. So then I run into issues there. Because I want to put small grains, because then I can at least get a cover down that's going to help the soil. But I don't know how to do that.
What's the soil type on that field?
It'd be a clay loam.
Do you know its
It
crop
washes.
suitability? Do you know its crop suitability rating? You know, that's certainly not tame and muscatine soil.
Yeah, oh no, that's not Tama soil. Absolutely not. No, that's that's not the good stuff. That's the other stuff. This is ground that honestly should have been put to CRP or pasture long ago, and it wasn't. And I haven't been able to convince them to let me put it to pasture yet, but I've been working on it for about 4 years. It likes to wash. If you crack it, it's probably going to go somewhere. So I don't do a whole lot of tillage on it unless I absolutely have to. If I do tillage, I do shallow, except to fill gullies. Last 3 years have been good years for making gullies. So that's the other reason I was thinking a small grain, if I could get one to overwinter, like a winter wheat or winter rye, which will overwinter here fairly well, then it'd be nice to get, I could have green over the wintertime. It'd hold the soil fairly well in the spring. I could harvest the crop and then put something else in. I thought of trying to do a second crop of soybeans, although even in Marshall County, we're not hardly far enough south to get a decent crop of soybeans if I plant it after harvest of a winter grain crop. Most of the winter grain crops want to come off in July, and I want to get beans on before that. So I haven't quite figured out how to do it right. I thought about oats, but I don't know.
I want to share an experience I had on a piece of ground that we bought in the 1990s. Some of it really was degraded. And I used to just irritate me watch the degradation that went on over there, because it was people really didn't care what they're doing. It come right down to it. And so at any rate, when I bought it, the first thing I did on the worst ground is I seeded it down, and I let it in pasture about 5 years. Then after about 5 years of pasture, I tiled it out every 40 foot probably, maybe every 50 foot, even though it was a fairly, it's the top of the hill. And then I went into long-term organic rotation with manure. We get commercial eggshells. Really tried to take good care of it. So if I spread manure, I spread more on there. I overwintered the stock cows on there. I did everything I could think of, and that went on from probably 1995 on. Nothing I did make any difference, and there never was a situation that I got a normal yield of any crop off that degraded ground. And a couple years ago, in frustration, I went out and took a soil test, and I sent it up to the elevator, and the test came back, and even though I don't buy any fertilizing chemicals, I still visit with those guys, and that guy says, you really got that ground in good shape. He said, that must grow some terrific crops. And I looked at him and laughed, and I says, there's nothing I grow. It doesn't yield about a third less on this piece of ground, and I have absolutely no idea what in the world to do to restore it. And I don't believe in bug dust, put it that way. So nonetheless, a couple years ago, I thought, well, let's go back to 4-H's Bible, that big green 4-H's big resource book. And the number one soil improving crop on the face of the earth is sweet clover. So what I did was, again, you got to go back to the overall goal, and this is only probably 2 or 3 acres. In the following spring, I planted it to the small grains as normal, but the underseeding was strictly sweet clover. At harvest time, we set the windrow as high as possible and just cut the tops off of the small grains, combined them, spread the straw out in the field, and did nothing else. Sweet clover grew like crazy, so it got a good establishment. The next year, I think that was 2010, and then we had plenty of moisture. That sweet clover, I never saw any of my entire life grow like it, and I've got pictures of it. By mid-June, you couldn't walk through the field. The sweet clover's over top your shoulders, and I think even the deer would stay away from it. They get lost in there. And so the sweet clover finally showed that that ground would grow a crop. And so what I did about the 1st of July is then we shredded that sweet clover, and then I moldboard plowed that mass down. Then we put another cover crop on top of it. I think it was turnips, horseseed radish turnips, Chili's radish. That's what we used. And then that grew pretty good. And then last year, it went back to a small grain rotation, and now this year it's in hay and pasture, and after that's going to go back to corn. And we'll see what happens to that ground. But all my experiences with trying to restore ground that's been degraded had been pretty frustrating. And even though all the tests in the lab said that we've got things completely restored, the combine said, I don't think so.
Well, that's incredibly frustrating. Wow. Yeah, the sweet clover, I've read a lot of good things about it. I've got some old books from the 1920s when that was the #1 thing you used on degraded ground. So I hope it works for you, because I'm actually going to use it on some of the ground I've got. It's actually reclaimed from a gravel pit. So we'll see if it works on that.
Are you familiar with the book I'm talking about? It's the Heath, Metcalf, and Barnes book, The Science of Grasslands Agriculture. It's a green book, and I think the big cover on it's all called Forages. And it's a thick book, and you can find them around. Probably going to cost you $20 or $30, but it really is the Forages Bible. Maybe the agronomists today don't have something more modern, and I think that was printed in the 1970s, 1980s. But are we on the same page with that resource?
No, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, if you want to write that, I'm sure it's Heath, H-E-A-T-H, and Metcalf, M-E-T-C-A-L-F, and Barnes. I'm sure it's Heath, Metcalf, and Barnes, and it's Forages, The Science of Grasslands Agriculture.
All right, yeah, I'll have to see if I can find a copy of that one. Luke's typing it up there, so is that what it's called there? Luke just put it up on the side there.
Yeah, he's got it absolutely right. Forages, Science of Grasslands Agriculture. There were several printings of it, but to my understanding of it, it's considered to be the basic one, that if you're out there and do field work, and you're going to take something with you to see what different crops would do, forages do for you, and all the different uses, and how to plant them, and where they fit and where they don't fit. That's the standard.
Well, alrighty, I'll have to dig that up.
I want to brag for a minute and say that I remember thumbing through that book in the Forester's Library at Iowa State University.
Foresters.
I think the Foresters must have taken the last copy. The agronomists didn't want it, I guess.
Yeah, Luke, I think when I was in agronomy at Iowa State, they didn't seem to think too strongly on forages. They only had one class on it. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that all those tree guys went and stole it from us. Dang tree huggers. Okay, well.
All right. I kind of want to talk. I want to see if I can get Wade to talk about business plans with Tom Frantzen. Tom, you got a beginning farmer here. He's got a dad with some land, and could you sell this rotation to convert the other rotation that's currently in place?
Okay. It's fun to be 60 years old in a sense, because you can kind of share people your experiences. I got to be totally honest with you. If I was in your shoes, I would put a lot of effort into getting all the parties to buy into the value of holistic management. It is never easy, because it's a discussion that I shouldn't call it a discussion, but it's a concept that says that good decisions can't be made until you've defined who's involved, what they want out of life, and what it's going to take long term to sustain it. and it's messy. No, people don't want those type of discussions. We're going to get uncomfortable. Next thing, mother's going to be crying about something. I mean, it's just, there's all kinds of, these are real human beings. But you get through that, and you get people to discuss what they seriously want out of life, and how they want to make this thing happen long term, and what things are valuable to them. The value then is so great, because then you start to test your actions against your values. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of real simple examples. I'm not condemning chemical use. Farming chemicals is your own personal decision, it's fine. But that chemical use was a violation of my quality of life. And until that got out of my life, my quality of life was being jeopardized. Holistic management got me to see that. But even the Practical Farmers Iowa didn't get me to that. So I'm not being put down here at all. It's just, how do you get to the understanding of what you really want out of life? And then start to make decisions based on those values. If you can get your family members to understand how valuable this is, and if they would, for example, say, well, listen, we want this farm to continue on way into the future, which means I'm not going to live forever, which means there's going to have to be restrictions on, what I'm going to do, or maybe I'm going to run the farm until I'm 100 years old and drop dead the next day and give no transition. So when people start to understand that they have to have a plan in place for transition, and the plan needs to be rooted in their quality of life, you've got a very powerful system. You'd call it a system, but a mechanism there to make decisions, and the decisions then are valuable to what you want long term. So I would take and spend as much effort as I could in educating myself and getting the people involved to buy into that, because I've witnessed that firsthand and how valuable it can be. When I first got exposed to it, I went to a lecture in Minnesota, and there was 50 of us farmers at that lecture, and 47 of the 50th hated the guy that gave the program, thought it was the dumbest thing they ever heard of. 3 of us thought, this thing makes a heck of a lot of sense. And the fortunate was that all 3 of us went home, and our wives said, this really does sound like something makes some sense. How can we find out more? And years later, those concepts became part of making better decisions, which is really what it's all about, is making better decisions. And the world we sit is really challenging us to, just what do we really want out of life? And I don't think most people want that discussion. I think the average person is going to tell you what they want out of life is a lot of money, and once they get a lot of money, I'm going to be very happy. And that type of shallow, superficial pursuit of things, it just gets us to this mad place we're at today, because one guy's got all the cookies and everybody else is supposed to starve to death. So if I could really hope and pray that something good would happen to you, it would be for you to be able to get the people involved to buy into that long-term concept of values-orientated decision-making. Not the hell of a sales bill. I don't get paid for this, but.
All right. Well, thanks, Tom. We've had quite a few discussions. We've done some of our the basic transition classes, succession planning, and that sort of thing, but haven't really sat down and done a holistic management evaluation, I guess you could say. And communication is always an interesting thing within families. On my own end, my dad doesn't really talk much about how he feels or about what he thinks about things, unless it's something he doesn't like. That one is generally pretty well recognized. But the trying to figure out what everyone can get along with and what will work for the long run is a little bit more challenging. It's kind of like pulling teeth. But you're right, we definitely need to sit down and do some more planning.
Yeah, it really is what is at stake, because without that you're not going to make progress, and then the financial difficulties of the high value of land it continues to aggravate it. because we face the same thing here on some land that we rent, and face some decisions that I just don't look forward to at all. But you got to go back on, if you know what you want out of life. And I think I've been very impressed with everything you shared tonight. I think you're a fine person with a very good attitude, and you're struggling with things, but man, you're talking about them. And the other thing you've got that's really important is that the practical farmers of Iowa are a unique group of people, and there's a camaraderie there that's absolutely different. And if you talk to people who go to other different types of farm meetings, and then they go to one of these like this or get involved, they go, these things are so much fun to go to because it's a supportive community and you can share things and you really feel like people care. And that is the type of community that we're trying to preserve here, and the value of that is, I think, just can't be even quantified.
Well, we've got about 2 minutes. If there's one more question, I think I might just congratulate Tom and Wade for a really great talk here, and I'll be sure to put this on our blog and get this sent out so everybody can watch the recordings. Another question from you, Wade?
I don't have a whole lot more questions, I guess. Have you run into any real problems on grazing your hay ground?
Oh yeah, I lost 3 nice stock cows and a herd bull last summer to bloat, and that was over a 4-month period of time. That I think rooted in the fact we got so dry and then grew as alfalfa. And I would rotate those cows in the late afternoon when it was as dry out as I could imagine, and I was using bloat blocks, and so I hadn't lost anything to bloat for a long time. Last summer was a kind of an eye-opening experience. That's been one of the worst. I've been out there in the mud up to my butt end too, see different things. But in general, it's worked well. The cows love being strip grazed, and it makes a very compatible relationship there. That's worked really, really well. It's also kind of an interesting thing. This I've never been on a Farminar program like this. It takes this much internet service. I didn't realize that our internet service at home is 2% download capacity of what the extension service has here. So this has been kind of a technical marvel for me to observe tonight. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much all for being here. Please join us again next week. We've got another Farminar on pricing poultry. After that, we're going to have one on business planning, using financial projections to guide your first years in business. And then we're going to finish up with Ron Roseman. Tom talked about Ron tonight, mentioned him as a big force in his farm career. And so please join us for the rest of this series, Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock. And thanks again to Tom and Wade.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.